The fluorescent lights of the maternity hospital corridor hummed softly, indifferent to the tension that clung to the air like a heavy fog. Nurses moved briskly between rooms, their calm professionalism masking the quiet dramas unfolding behind closed doors. In one corner of the hallway stood a young woman who had given birth only hours earlier. Her face was pale with exhaustion, her arms aching, her heart full and fragile all at once. Instead of congratulations or gentle concern, she was facing the sharp, unforgiving gaze of her mother-in-law, whose words cut deeper than any physical pain. The older woman's voice was cold and unwavering as she insisted that the new mother leave the hospital immediately. She spoke of shame, of disappointment, of how things had not gone according to her expectations. There was no trace of empathy for the woman who had just endured labor, no acknowledgement of the tiny life resting in the nursery nearby. Each sentence felt like a shove, pushing the daughter-in-law further toward humiliation and despair. Other visitors slowed their steps, sensing something was wrong, but no one intervened. Silence often becomes a shield when people are uncomfortable. The young woman tried to respond, but her throat tightened. She had imagined this day so differently: flowers, soft words, maybe even a tentative smile from the woman who had never fully accepted her. Instead, she felt discarded, as if her value had ended the moment she fulfilled her duty of giving birth. The phrase, abandoned, echoed in her mind, a bitter truth she could no longer ignore. The mother-in-law's final remark, sharp and dismissive, suggested that the young woman had rushed to the wrong station in life, choosing the wrong path, the wrong family. Just as the confrontation reached its cruel peak, footsteps echoed down the corridor with unexpected confidence. A man approached, his presence immediately shifting the energy in the room. He was calm but unmistakably authoritative, his eyes taking in the scene with quiet understanding. When he spoke, his voice was steady, firm enough to cut through the tension without raising itself. He addressed the mother-in-law directly, questioning her behavior and reminding her, in no uncertain terms, that this was a hospital, a place of care and healing, not a stage for cruelty. The effect was instantaneous. The mother-in-law froze, her mouth opening slightly as if to argue, then closing again when no words came. Her face lost its sharpness, replaced by shock. The sudden guest continued, explaining the legal and moral boundaries she was crossing, and emphasizing the vulnerability of a woman who had just given birth. Other people in the hallway stopped completely now, watching as the power dynamic shifted. What moments earlier had been an exercise in dominance became an uncomfortable exposure of heartlessness. The young mother felt something she had not felt all day: relief. It came quietly, like a deep breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She was no longer alone, no longer defenseless. The mother-in-law, stripped of her authority, muttered something under her breath and turned away, retreating down the corridor with stiff, hurried steps. The silence she left behind was different, lighter, almost kind. Stories like this resonate because they reflect a universal truth about vulnerability and power. Moments of life-changing significance, birth, loss, transformation, often reveal the true nature of those around us. Compassion can feel miraculous when it appears unexpectedly, and cruelty can feel unbearable when it comes from those who are supposed to protect and support. That sudden guest became more than a bystander; he became a reminder that dignity can be defended, even in the most painful circumstances. In a completely different setting, under bright studio lights and in front of a live audience, another confrontation would soon capture public attention. Toni Braxton, a celebrated artist known for her powerful voice and emotional depth, found herself in a heated exchange on The Clarkson Show. What began as a seemingly routine conversation shifted when the discussion touched on deeply personal and sensitive subjects. The atmosphere changed subtly at first: longer pauses, guarded expressions, before tension rose unmistakably. Braxton, no stranger to public scrutiny, attempted to steer the conversation back to safer ground, but the momentum had already shifted. The exchange grew sharper, words overlapping, emotions spilling out in ways that felt raw and unfiltered. For viewers, it was uncomfortable yet compelling, a reminder that even polished talk shows are not immune to real human conflict. When Braxton finally stood up and walked off the set, the gesture spoke louder than any argument could. Her departure was not theatrical in the traditional sense; it was decisive, personal, and heavy with meaning. It signaled a boundary drawn in real time, a refusal to continue a conversation that no longer felt respectful or safe. The audience sat stunned, the host momentarily at a loss for words. In that moment, Braxton reclaimed control, choosing self-respect over performance. Both situations, though worlds apart, share a common thread. They highlight the importance of boundaries and the courage it takes to enforce them. Whether in a quiet hospital corridor or on a brightly lit television stage, standing up to unfair treatment requires strength. Sometimes that strength comes from within, other times, it arrives unexpectedly through the intervention of someone else. The phrase, "you're rushing to the wrong station," lingers because it speaks to judgment and regret imposed by others. Yet life rarely follows a straight track, and no one else gets to decide which station is the right one. The young mother, protected in her most vulnerable moment, and Toni Braxton, walking away from a situation that crossed her limits, both demonstrate that dignity is not granted by others, it is claimed. In the end, these stories remind us that silence can be broken, that power can shift in an instant, and that even when someone tries to reduce another person to nothing, a single act of courage can change everything. The maternity ward was unusually quiet for a place where new lives entered the world every hour. Behind the calm, however, emotions ran high, and nowhere was that more evident than near the window at the end of the corridor. A young woman stood there in a thin hospital robe, her body still trembling from exhaustion. Only a short time earlier, she had given birth, an experience that left her physically weak yet emotionally overwhelmed. Instead of being surrounded by warmth and support, she found herself facing hostility from the very person who should have welcomed her as family. Her mother-in-law stood opposite her, posture rigid, eyes sharp with disapproval. There was no softness in her tone, no hesitation in her words. She spoke as if delivering a verdict, accusing the young woman of ruining expectations, of bringing disgrace, of not being worthy of the family name. With chilling calm, she demanded that her daughter-in-law leave the hospital, insisting she had no right to stay. Each word landed like a blow, pushing the young mother closer to breaking. The woman tried to explain, to remind her that she had just given birth, that she needed rest, that the baby needed care. But compassion was absent. The older woman dismissed every attempt at reason, repeating that the young woman had chosen the wrong path in life, rushed to the wrong station, and now had to face the consequences. The phrase echoed cruelly, as if her entire existence had been reduced to a mistake. Tears welled in the young mother's eyes, not just from pain but from humiliation. Other people passed by, nurses and visitors alike, sensing the tension but choosing not to get involved. It was easier to pretend not to notice. The young woman felt abandoned, exposed in one of the most vulnerable moments of her life. Holding herself together required more strength than she thought she had left. Then, without warning, the rhythm of the hallway changed. Confident footsteps approached, steady and purposeful. A man appeared, his presence immediately commanding attention. He did not raise his voice, yet authority radiated from him. He asked what was happening, and for the first time, the mother-in-law faltered. Her confident accusations suddenly sounded hollow when repeated aloud to a stranger. The man listened calmly, then responded with clarity and firmness. He reminded her where she was, explained the rights of a patient, and spoke of basic human decency. His words were measured but unyielding, leaving no room for argument. The mother-in-law tried to interrupt, but he continued, pointing out the cruelty of her behavior and the potential consequences if it did not stop immediately. The effect was immediate and almost shocking. The woman who moments earlier had been so sure of her power now stood silent, her face pale, her mouth slightly open but unable to form a response. The hallway seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, she turned away and left, her authority gone, replaced by visible discomfort. For the young mother, the moment felt unreal. Relief washed over her, mixed with disbelief. Someone had seen her pain and chosen to act. She sank into a nearby chair, tears finally falling freely, but this time they were not tears of shame. They were tears of release. In that instant, she understood how fragile dignity could be, and how powerful it was when defended. Far from that hospital, in a completely different world of cameras and applause, another intense moment would unfold, capturing public attention in its own dramatic way. On the Kelly Clarkson show, Toni Braxton sat under bright studio lights, prepared for what was meant to be a friendly conversation. She smiled politely, answered early questions with grace, and engaged the audience as expected of a seasoned performer. As the discussion progressed, however, the tone subtly shifted. Questions became more probing, drifting into deeply personal territory. Braxton's body language changed, her smile tightened, her answers grew shorter. She attempted to redirect the conversation, offering professional anecdotes instead, but the momentum had already turned. The exchange grew tense. Words overlapped, pauses stretched uncomfortably long, and the atmosphere became charged. For viewers, it was clear that a line had been crossed. Braxton, who had spent decades navigating the pressures of fame, recognized the moment instantly. She leaned forward, said a few sharp words, then stood up. Her decision to walk off the show was swift and resolute. There was no dramatic flourish, no shouting. The act itself carried the message. The audience sat in stunned silence as she exited the stage, leaving behind unanswered questions and a visibly shaken host. In that moment, the carefully controlled environment of a daytime talk show cracked, revealing raw emotion beneath the surface. Braxton's walkout sparked debate almost immediately. Some praised her for asserting boundaries, while others criticized the abruptness of her departure. Yet for many, the scene resonated deeply. It was a reminder that even public figures are entitled to protect themselves, that vulnerability does not disappear under fame, and that walking away can be an act of strength rather than weakness. Both stories, though vastly different in setting, are bound by the same core truth. Whether in a quiet hospital corridor or on a televised stage, moments arise when dignity is challenged. In those moments, the response defines everything. Sometimes help comes unexpectedly, through a stranger willing to intervene. Other times, it comes from within, through the courage to stand up and leave. The idea of the wrong station suggests judgment imposed by others, a belief that someone's life choices can be evaluated from the outside. Yet life does not follow a single track. Each person arrives at their own station in their own time. The young mother, defended when she could not defend herself, and Toni Braxton, refusing to remain in a conversation that caused harm, both demonstrate the same lesson. Respect is not something to beg for. It is something to claim, to protect, and sometimes to fight for. And when someone attempts to take it away, all it takes is one decisive moment, one voice raised, one step taken, to change the direction of the story entirely.